Texas lawmakers have long known about flood dangers along the Guadalupe. Why were calls for life-saving protections not heeded? That story and more today on the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. Amid lawsuits, two top state leaders say they want to make it easier for summer camps along the Guadalupe to reopen this summer, less than a year after the deadly July 4th floods. We'll hear more. Plans to open a data center at a U.S. military base in Texas, getting serious pushback from residents of one of the state's biggest cities. Also, what's behind a huge increase in drug overdose deaths at Texas prisons and why officials are raising red flags over a rise in cases of what's called valley fever. All that and a whole lot more coming up today on the Texas Standard. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on the 7th day of May, 2026. I'm David Brown. Less than a year after catastrophic flooding in the Hill Country killed more than 100 people, including 27 campers and counselors at Camp Mystic. A courtroom fight is now unfolding over how Texas should prevent the next disaster. 19 summer camps in the area along the Guadalupe, hard hit by the July 4th floods, are suing the state over a new law requiring those camps to maintain redundant emergency communication systems. That's a mandate that many operators say effectively forces them to install fiber optic internet service just to stay licensed. Camp leaders argue these costs can run into the millions of dollars, and in some rural areas, well, the infrastructure simply doesn't exist. Now, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and House Speaker Dustin Burrows say they are supporting easing the fiber requirement while keeping broader safety reforms in place and just letting the camps open for the summer season. So after one of the deadliest flood disasters in modern Texas history, what actually counts as meaningful preparedness? Who gets to decide when safety measures go too far? And in a sense, is this part of a larger pattern that led to the disaster last summer in the first place? As the Texas Tribune reports in a deep investigation into the history of efforts to improve flood safety in this area, lawmakers have known for years about the dangers of sudden flooding in and around this place, heavy with summer camps, but over the years, repeatedly failed to take action. One of the authors of this report, the Trib's Emily Foxhall, joins us now. Emily, welcome back to the Standard.
Thank you for having me.
You write in this story that lawmakers have repeatedly rejected bills that could have saved lives when it comes to floods. Can you walk us through some of what you found when it comes to that history?
Yes. Yeah. We've been very interested since the flooding happened in understanding how it was that, as you mentioned, people were in flood-prone spots and dangerous spots, as identified by the federal government in these flood maps. My colleague Lexi, she dug through decades of bills that had been proposed by state legislators, basically since this program known as the National Flood Insurance Program was passed in the late 60s and started to require local governments to pass standards or regulations for living in and developing in flood-prone places. And we focused in on three bills in particular. So one of those was proposed in 1973 that would have banned building structures in the what's known as the floodway. So if you'll bear with me on a technical term, the floodway is basically the channel of the river, and that includes kind of the banks of the river where flooding can be very, very dangerous. That bill failed. There was another bill in 1989 that a lot of experts described to us. They use this word haunting, that would have banned youth camps from being in the floodplain. And a third bill in 1993 that would have required residences to be raised up or elevated a foot higher than standard. And that's something that's very common. But
forgive me for interrupting. Just a couple of things by way of housekeeping. You mentioned Lexi Churchill, who's with Texas Tribune and ProPublica, who co-reported this story with you and Pratik Rabala, I believe it was. Something else that I am very curious about, if these bills kept coming forward, why did they fail to pass? Is it clear if there was some common pushback against them?
Yes, we were interested in that too. And I guess the first commonality that stuck out to us was several of them were proposed after disasters, so it was sort of starting to notice this pattern of flooding disaster in the state, and a change was proposed and then it failed. And sort of over the years, lawmakers brought up this idea of protecting individual property rights. And that's something that came up even after this July 4th flood, when Wes Verdell, who represents Kerr County in one of the hearings, he said in rural areas, they quote, enjoy the freedom to take our risk and build as we would like to. So a lot of people have pointed to that in Texas, it is, of course, a state that values, the ability of individuals to evaluate their own risk when it comes to their own property.
Yeah, but at the same time, we're talking about not just these camps, but the people who attend these camps and don't, in a sense, get a say, except whether or not they send their kids to the camps. And there, generations of kids have been sent to those camps. It's become a kind of a tradition in Texas for a lot of families.
Right. And for camps, interestingly, after the floods, kind of the one type of building that legislators are now requiring to be out of flood-prone places are youth camps. They didn't pass changes for homes, or we've been interested in RV parks also, where at least 48 people died in RV parks. But yes, Texas legislators did kind of focus in on exactly what you're saying, which is maybe it's best for kids at youth camps, on rivers especially, to not be sleeping in places that are known to be flood prone.
We don't have much time, but was substantive, meaningful legislation passed in the last legislative session, or no?
The main focus is exactly what we've been talking about, which was the 27 families you mentioned who lost campers and counselors at Camp Mystic really lobbied for these changes. And it was a sweeping change about youth camp protection that included where cabins can be built. Our story was just focused on kind of these broader systemic questions of how, generally speaking, people, developers and individuals are allowed to build in flood-prone places, and focused on this sort of history of big picture change in Texas that is continuing not to happen like in other states.
This is important reading, and we encourage you to check it out. We'll have a link to it, texasstandard.org. Emily Foxhall, climate reporter for the Texas Trib. Emily, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
One of the things we've been covering here on The Standard is the rise of data centers, and Texas has become ground zero for massive projects. I'm Angela Kocherga. Large plots of land and friendly regulators have attracted data centers, first by tech giants, and now the Army wants to build one. Diego Mendoza Moyers covers energy and the environment for El Paso Matters, and he's been writing about the new project planned at Fort Bliss here in El Paso. Diego, welcome back to The Standard.
Thanks for having me.
Well, so the Army is planning to construct a 3-gigawatt data center complex at Fort Bliss on the military base. Why?
Well, they say that they need to expand their, compute capacity, right? Basically, the ability to sort of, process, enable all their AI technology, as we're seeing greater adoption of AI by both the private industry, but now by the military, that says, we want to use AI for like war fighting and targeting and, missiles and so forth, but also just for sort of the management of the Army's bureaucracy. One example they gave of this facility would be to sort of store all of the pay and entitlement information securely for every U.S. soldier. So that's what they're saying. We need it both for warfighting as well as for the management of the military bureaucracy.
Well, so it looks like the Army is planning to draw energy from El Paso Electric, which serves nearly 500,000 people here in West Texas. Do we know how this could impact the local community?
We don't know exactly yet, but I just want to put 3 gigawatts into perspective, right? That's what the Army says that the amount of electricity this data center will require. 3 gigawatts is greater than the total generation capacity El Paso Electric has for its whole service territory, from Hatch, New Mexico, down to Las Cruces, El Paso, out to Van Horn. So all the people who live there, this one facility will require more electricity than that entire region. So it's a really, really massive scale we're talking about. The Army has said they'll probably power it with natural gas turbines. We don't yet yet know, will El Paso Electric build those? Will the military build its own and sort of keep it isolated from the grid? We don't know yet. The military has said it will not impact customer bills. That was one of the first things they said. But one concern I have, 3 gigawatts is a lot of electricity demand to meet. If you meet that with natural gas turbines, it's going to produce a whole lot of air pollution.
Yeah, we have already had some concerns expressed about that. And people have also asked about water usage. How has the Army responded to concerns about the environmental impact overall, but also water?
The number one thing the Army said, this was the first question I asked, what about water usage? They say this facility will be water neutral, meaning it replenishes as much water as it uses. Another data center being built here by Meta has said the same thing. We're going to be water neutral. We don't know how that's going to work mechanically. We do know Fort Bliss, it kind of supplies its own water through wells on Fort Bliss. They don't totally tie into El Paso water system. And so most likely the water source will be from groundwater wells there. Of course, we're in a period of big water stress in El Paso. We're not going to get a lot of water coming through the river into El Paso this year. And when we don't have a lot of river water, it means more groundwater pumping. And so that's one of the big concerns. Will this data center require pumping a lot of our finite groundwater? One thing I'll say on this, the desalination plant we have in town that's co-owned by El Paso Water and the U.S. Army. So maybe we see some sort of transfer of water at the desalination plant. But that's what they say. Hey, don't worry, everybody. It's going to be water neutral.
So you mentioned Meta. Let's talk about this region. Really has become, it's becoming a hub for these data centers. We've got Meta, Oracle, and OpenAI planning projects in the area, one also just across the state line in New Mexico in our region. How could this all affect the developmental stage of West Texas in the coming years?
Yeah, it's a really, really rapid build out here in the El Paso region of data centers. We've got 1 gigawatt of electricity demand at Meta, almost 2.5 gigawatts of Project Jupiter of electricity demand there. And then now we're talking about 3 gigawatts at Fort Bliss. So almost 6.5 gigawatts of electricity demand just for 3 data center campuses. It's an unprecedented scale of build out. I think it could have a big impact on our economy, right? And make El Paso sort of a hub of AI infrastructure. The questions I have, as I mentioned, are will all of the electricity generation for these 3 facilities create a really deleterious amount of air pollution and maybe affect our water supplies and so forth? Those are my concerns, but I think the economic development boosters in our region see this as a really welcome investment of many billions of dollars and a lot of new infrastructure and technology and everything that could really change El Paso's economy going forward.
Well, one last thing, in the little time we have left, getting back to Fort Bliss, do we know the cost of that and when will it be up and operating?
Yeah, this is the funny thing about this facility. Everybody says, we have no idea. We don't know how we're going to achieve water neutrality. We're not sure where the power is going to come from. We don't even know how much this is going to cost, but we're going to be operational by the end of 2027. So a lot of unanswered questions, but a really rapid timeline. I don't know how those two facts match up, but we're going to learn a lot in the months ahead.
Well, thank you for covering this story. Diego Mendoza Moyers covers energy and the environment for El Paso Matters. Diego, thank you for joining us on The Standard.
Thanks.
Hey, something weird is happening in Texas prisons with overdoses on the rise in many of the state's lockups. What exactly is going on there? We'll find out in a minute. Also, Apple and Samsung, they're rivals, right? Well, actually, if you dig a little deeper, it looks like a partnership of sorts in the works. Texas might be something of a beneficiary, too. All that's coming up a little later as the Texas Standard continues.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Monthly Presents The Story, a docuseries about the state of Texas. Stories about our culture and what's at stake, from the perspective of the magazine's writers, airing weekends on local PBS stations and streaming on the PBS website and app.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Texas prisons saw a 2,400% increase in drug overdose deaths over the past 7 years. As Toluwani Osibamowo of KERA reports, officials believe it's the result of an influx of contraband into state lockups.
According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, 129 inmates died of overdoses last year. That's up from 5 such deaths in 2018. Bobby Lumpkin is TDCJ's executive director. He told a state Senate committee this week the root cause is inmates dealing with addiction.
It unfortunately is an extension of the criminal element, that even though they've been through the judicial system, been sentenced, they still depend back on that type of activity.
But he says that demand is met by the supply of drugs coming in as contraband. TDCJ wants state lawmakers to fund technology that will better detect prohibited items. I'm Toluwani Osibamowo in Dallas.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. What you're about to hear doesn't often make it outside a very specific set of walls. As a part of May Mental Health Awareness Month, reporter Josiah Winnell of KACU is reporting on how the legal system handles people with mental health issues. And today, he takes us behind the scenes to reveal the inner workings of something called the AOT docket. AOT stands for Assisted Outpatient Treatment.
Judge David McLean presides over an AOT docket in Bexar County. What you're about to hear is one of the first times an AOT docket in Texas has ever been recorded and shared publicly. The patient's identity is protected, but the conversation is real.
What else can we help you with? What else is going on?
Insurance.
Insurance? Like health insurance? Okay,
So when you saw the doctor Friday, did they get you prescriptions? Good.
perfect. So we'll deliver them to you then. Okay, even better.
Medications, insurance, a doctor's appointment on Friday. This is what the docket is for, to care for the individual.
Do you know what medications you're taking right now?
Taking Lexapro and Risperidone.
Awesome. Okay, good. You sound like you're doing great. You feel good? Medications seem to be working well? What's your diagnosis?
Major depression
Mm-hmm. And that's it?
with psychotic features.
Okay, all right. So if we get out of balance, you start having some hallucinations and things like that, right? Okay. So we don't want to get out of balance, right? No. So that's good. And the medications seem to be controlling that at the level they're at right now. Everything's going good. I'm so glad to hear that. That is awesome. That is really, really good.
This is not a sentencing. There is no threat in the room. The judge knows the person's diagnosis. They know when they last saw a doctor. They know what happens when the medication stops.
Part of what this program, actually the main goal of this program, is keep you out of the hospital, keep you out of jail. Because sometimes our mental health can end up having those effects where we end up in one of those two places. Hopefully what we can do with this program is help you develop some habits and some practices and gain enough knowledge where you're able to manage your own mental health.
Manage your own mental health. That is the end game, not permanent supervision, graduation. A person who no longer needs the court because the court helped them build something that holds on its own. Judge Kazin spent years watching that work. He also spent years watching people misread what it is and what it isn't.
But understand that AOT is not a silver bullet. It is a tool in the chest that helps a certain category of people most of the time. But it's not the alternative to long-term hospitalization when long-term hospitalization is needed. It's not even the alternative to somebody who just needs to go to jail, because sometimes people just need to go to jail, right? And it's the people who try to make it the silver bullet, or the people who try to make it out to be the devil itself, that I think do it an injustice.
For years, AOT in Texas was primarily a civil tool, a way to help people before they crossed paths with a police officer. But a massive gap remained. If someone with a serious mental illness was arrested on a low-level, nonviolent charge, they often became trapped in the competency restoration loop, waiting months or years in jail for a state hospital bed just to become fit for a trial that might only last an hour. In 2019, the Texas legislature passed Senate Bill 362. For the first time, judges had a way to pause certain low-level nonviolent criminal cases and transfer them into the civil mental health system.
But we create this additional option as if the person appears competent, that you could, in effect, hold this prosecution in abeyance and then kick it over to this probate court, the court with jurisdiction over a civil commitment, to look at whether the person meets criteria for an outpatient civil commitment.
This isn't just a legal tweak. It is a fundamental shift in how the state views its responsibility. By using Senate Bill 362, Texas is reaching a brand new population, people who used to be the system's problem, but are now the team's focus. Court-mandated treatment programs, particularly those involving mental illness, are not the kind of policy that campaigns are built on. Judge Kazin remembers the climate in which he started.
When back in those days, if you were going to get elected, you didn't get elected talking about therapy and helping people and changing their lives. You had to be tough on crime. In the late 90s and the early 2000s, everything was real tough justice. That was on every campaign sign.
And yet, it passed. Professor Shannon believes the reason is simpler than it looks.
A lot of the issues we're talking about are mental health or are not liberal issues or conservative issues. They're more administration of justice issues, good government issues, where I think there's a lot of common ground.
Kazan's own program became the evidence when you look at the numbers.
We did a study several years ago about random 100 people that had gone through the program. We cut their hospitalization rates and arrest rates by 80%.
Financially, it's equally stark.
The average bill of costs for an individual that we pick up and put in a hospital bed or emergency room is $2,000 a day. And if we can cut that over their lifetime by 80%, this thing pays for itself in the first week.
This efficiency is vital because the current system has flipped its mission entirely.
State hospitals, which originated primarily to serve a civil population, to keep people out of the criminal justice system, that's flipped. And today, out of their patient beds, persons there, they're about 75% criminal forensic cases and only 25% civil.
Texas has not solved this. No state has. The waiting lists are still long, the rural gaps are still wide, and the debate over coercive care is far from settled. But what Texas has built through the commission, through AOT, through specialty courts, and through Senate Bill 362 is a system with more doors than it had before. More moments when a person can be seen before they fall, rather than after. I'm Josiah Winnell in Abilene.
The multidisciplinary thinking approach didn't start in Texas. It was actually pioneered in a courthouse in Miami-Dade County by a judge who believed the only way to solve a problem this complex was to stop asking one system to carry it alone. Next week, we'll be hearing about something called the Miami Model. You can check out previous episodes of Josiah's series at texasstandard.org.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Hildebrand MBA at UT Austin's McCombs School of Business, providing MBA programs preparing leaders for positive community impact, offering multiple formats, serving professionals throughout Texas. More at texasmba.com.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Tom Perumian. An event at a water park in Grand Prairie, originally billed as Muslim only, has been canceled. Governor Abbott had threatened to pull more than $500,000 in state funding from the city if it was allowed to go on, calling the event unconstitutional. The water park was rented out by Amina Knight.
I am curating this event for the Muslim community, for which I am a part of, so that we can gather and have a good time in a modest environment that is rare for water parks.
Grand Prairie canceled the event last night. The threat to pull funding is the same tactic Abbott used to force Dallas, Houston, and Austin to change their policies involving police cooperation with immigration officials. A Midland man is facing federal charges for allegedly shooting at Secret Service agents in Washington. 45-year-old Michael Marks was taken into custody by agents who were performing security for Vice President J.D. Vance's motorcade. A new report from the Sierra Club details water usage of gas, coal, and nuclear power plants. Texas Public Radio's Jerry Clayton has more.
The report shows that in 2024, Texas power plants consumed roughly 100 billion gallons of water, while renewables and battery storage use barely any water at all. Lindsay Mader is press secretary with the Sierra Club.
We think it's far past time to not look in every nook and cranny for where we can find water savings. So we think this water use category still deserves a lot of attention.
2027 Texas State Water Plan estimates the state could face a shortage of 1.2 trillion gallons as soon as 2030. Renewable energy supplied 30% of the state's electricity needs in 2024, but uses minimal water to operate. I'm Jerry Clayton in San Antonio.
Texas Tech students are holding a funeral today for academic freedom on campus. Raiders Against Censorship is the student group behind the protest. They say the event is a response to a year of decisions that threaten the integrity of universities. In April, Texas Tech chancellors ordered campuses to phase out academic programs centered on sexual orientation and gender identity. Here's James Snoddy, one of the protest's coordinators.
Texas Tech University and its students are facing major consequences due to the deep policies. This includes student success and the validity of our degrees.
Other schools have also been impacted by a statewide push to limit diversity, equity, and inclusion at Texas public universities. I'm Tom Perumian from the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from Texas Monthly Presents The Story, a docuseries about the state of Texas, our culture, and what's at stake from the perspective of the magazine's writers. Weekends on local PBS stations and streaming on the PBS website and app.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm David Brown. When Apple announced Mac computers with its own chips inside back in 2020, observers heralded the company's ability to take control of its own destiny. These days, Apple chips can be found in all of its computers, tablets, and the iPhone. But Apple isn't immune to the kinds of supply and cost disruptions that plague most of the consumer tech industry. In fact, Bloomberg reported this week that Apple is considering buying chips from Samsung and Intel to ease the pinch. And some of those chips could be made right here in Texas. Our tech expert Omar Gallaga wrote about Apple's potential chip moves for CNET, and he's here with more. Omar, welcome.
Hey, David, thanks for having me.
For those who don't follow the chip supply chain, tell us a bit more about how it works. The chips in your iPhone or Mac are Apple chips, but they're actually made by someone else?
Yeah, every time we see an Apple event where they announce new phones or new MacBooks or what have you, they always say, there's the M1 chip, the M4, the A18. Apple designs these chips, but they don't all actually manufacture a lot of these. It's TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor, that is their main supplier for a lot of these very powerful processors. And they're worried about shortages. They're worried that TSMC, with all the business that they do for Apple and other companies, that they're just not going to be able to keep up. We're facing a global memory and semiconductor shortage, and companies like Samsung, that make these chips, especially memory, are cleaning up because there's shortages, prices are going up, and Apple is trying to hedge its bets that it's not going to run out of these chips and processors and be able to ship out its iPhones and other products.
TSMC is a really big deal there in Taiwan, and obviously it's an important chip maker for really high-end applications in a lot of situations. Tell us about the potential Texas connection here.
Yeah, well, Samsung has big manufacturing plants in Texas, Intel as well, and Apple has been trying to shift some of its manufacturing to places like Houston and assembly and some of its products that it makes in the U.S. And, there's a political angle to that, too. Obviously, the Trump administration has been pressuring tech companies that are based in the U.S. to try to keep as much of their operations here, to manufacture smartphones in the U.S., which is not going to happen anytime soon. But definitely there's pressure for Apple to bring as much of its domestic production, even if it's with other partners, to the U.S. as possible.
I guess this would try to, be at least a step in the direction of making good on Apple's pledge to build or source more of its products in the U.S., right?
It would, but we're still a long way from being able to, say, manufacture an entire smartphone in the U.S. Like, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But a lot of those components can be. And Apple, this is part of Apple's larger strategy to kind of stop relying so much on all of its production coming out of China. They had previously moved some of its production to India, to Vietnam, and other places. And obviously, as much of it as they can do in the U.S., they're going to want to do that as well.
Apple's been bragging a lot about its M-series chips in its current line, but once upon a time in the not-too-distant past, Intel once powered the Mac, right?
Yeah, it took them a while to transition away from that. But this is Apple being pragmatic. They're going to advance their technology in any way that they can. And if that means partnering with someone else besides TSMC, they're going to do that, whether it's Intel or Samsung. And, it's more about the product than what's inside of it. These are things that the customers don't see. As long as the device works and it's powerful and it's fast, customers don't really care where those chips are sourced, really.
Yeah, so long as it works, that's the important part. Are there any potential issues with using a different chip supplier? I mean, I'm thinking about some software that might not be compatible. What about quality?
That's the question: is whether that Shifty is going to present any technical issues. And we should point out, this is not a done deal. They're in talks with Intel, supposedly, according to Bloomberg, and with Samsung, but no deal has been signed that we're aware of. They could walk away from those deals if they decide this is going to be too much of a headache to shift to another source, or that maybe these processors aren't going to have the quality that TSMC has already built into this process, from years of doing this. So it's not a done deal by any stretch.
Not a done deal. Is there any talk about a timeline? Are they under pressure to get this done in short order, or how do you see this playing out?
Well, we know a little bit from Samsung's latest earnings report that was just released. They had a 50-fold increase in revenue just from their chip business. And what Samsung is telling us is that these shortages, especially memory, if you've tried to buy PC memory anytime recently, it's hundreds of dollars more than it used to be. These shortages are going to continue at least through 2027. This is not going to let up anytime soon. So the pressure is going to increase on Apple to make sure that they've got the supply that they need. It's going to be at least another year and a half, maybe 2 years of Apple trying to ensure that its supply chain is intact and not going to get disrupted.
Yeah, Omar Gallaga tries not to confine himself to a single chip vendor. He writes for CNET and joins us here each week. Of course, Omar, thanks so much for the update. Keep us posted.
I sure appreciate it, David. Thanks for having me.
It's not just about the brisket or the ribs or the sausage or even the sides. It's the culture and people who are passionate about it. Where there's smoke, there's Daniel Vaughn, Texas Monthly Barbecue editor. Join us next Thursday on the Texas Standard.
Support for Where There's Smoke comes from H-E-B.
Hi, my name is Dory Burdett Pickle, and I'm the author of a book called Dawn that I wrote in collaboration with my mom, and you're listening to the Texas Standard. My mom was an avid musician. She was a classical pianist and a prolific composer. She had been in the hospital for a few days with pneumonia. My dad and I, and the doctors, we all thought she would survive and it would be fine. But she was convinced that she was dying, which was really interesting because medically we didn't really see a huge reason why she would be dying. So when she started telling me all these dreams and thoughts and visions she was having, I took it seriously because I wanted to respect her, but I also didn't really believe she would die. She said, "Do you know how you can see shapes in the clouds?" And of course, yes, you look up and there might be something that looks like a goat or a unicorn or whatever. And she said, "That's the same skill I'm using right now to see this." She said that she was literally staring death in the face while we were talking. She was standing at death's door. She seemed enticed by it, and she wanted to enter this other realm that was welcoming her. And I was trying to write it all down, and she downloaded all this information to me. Even at one point I said, we really need to stop and eat some lunch, and you need some food. And she said, "We really don't have time for that." And I was just like, okay, whatever you say, She was so confident, and she was so just excited to share with me and others via this book that there's nothing to be afraid of, and that this whole fear we have as a culture of death and dying and grief is not necessary, that it's not to be feared. And so she made me promise to write it. And I said, "Actually, Mom, you can write it when you get out of the hospital, and you can write songs about it, and you can write poetry about it, and it can be this whole next chapter of your life." And I remember she looked at me very clearly and said, "No, I won't be here. You have to write it, and you have to promise me to write it." There really was not enough time for me to digest it and then go back and ask questions. She downloaded it to me. There was no time for lunch, and then she died. She described this kind of ongoing, infinite, growing funnel, kind of like a tornadic shape that we're all a part of, kind of going through our journey as we progress upward. And she said there were 4 distinct sections: the physical realm at the bottom, where we all are, and then the realm of knowledge and the realm of spirit. And then the final realm, she said there was not a word to capture what it was. It was not something that could be described in a language that we would understand. And she tried to communicate to me that creativity and imagination are really key to us understanding where we are, who we are, why we're here. Because she's a composer, I listened to her music obsessively every day while I cried for the first week or two. And, I still listen to it quite a bit, and I play it, and I'm learning it, and I'm intimate with her music, which keeps me close to her. I might be laughing and having a great day, and then a song comes on the radio that reminds me of something, and I'm burst into tears. And I allow myself that because I think tears are healing, and I live with it. I live with it, and it's a part of my everyday, and sometimes I cry and sometimes I don't. And it's been a learning process. I feel like this book and her message and her ideas were super hopeful, and they offer so much hope and joy in such a time of sorrow. My name is Dory Burdett Pickle, and I'm the author of a book called Dawn, and you're listening to the Texas Standard.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. As the price of oil rises, so does the problem of oil rustling. We're talking about the theft of crude here. It's a crime that's been part of the Texas oil patch since the earliest days of wildcatters. But today, officials say oil field theft has grown into something far more organized, more dangerous, and more costly. David Martin Davies of Texas Public Radio has more.
In March of 2025, an oil pipeline exploded in the night sky over Reeves County in West Texas. Investigators said it was the result of oil thieves trying to tap into a pressurized pipeline.
They cut into the pipeline and tried to tap directly into the main pipeline.
That's Tim Murphy with the Texas Department of Public Safety, testifying recently before the Texas House Energy Resources Committee.
It sparked and it blew. They blew up everything in the area, but the pipeline burned for several days.
Murphy said this was an example of oil field theft that went horribly wrong, but it could have been much worse. The massive fire was contained before it reached a more populated area. Officials say the incident shows how oil field theft has become more than a property crime. It is a serious threat to workers, nearby communities, and critical energy infrastructure. And in West Texas, virtually anywhere you look is critical energy infrastructure. The Permian Basin provides about half of the nation's oil. The vast, flat, dusty landscape is populated with pump jacks, oil storage tanks, and drilling pads. Each one is a tempting target for a thief.
It's like any other commodity. When the price is high, they just get sexier.
That's Jim Wright, chairman of the Texas Railroad Commission, the state agency that oversees oil and gas production. Wright says the thieves are often sophisticated.
They're cloning these trucks. They can take a truck and get a full load of oil and not be noticed.
Wright says criminals paint tanker trucks to look like legitimate oil field service vehicles.
So as they go through these remote ranches to get access to that oil, they go unnoticed.
The stolen crude is sold through a broker who sells it onto the market. He says the theft is happening across Texas.
About 40% of the industry has experienced some sort of theft. And so I've heard that number could be as high as $1 billion on an annual basis.
Wright says the problem is growing, and recent criminal cases show the scale. In April, federal prosecutors announced that 14 people from Texas and New Mexico had been indicted in an alleged crude oil theft conspiracy. The indictment alleges crude oil was siphoned from producers in southeastern New Mexico and then transported across state lines into Texas for resale. Sheriff Stan Parker of Howard County in West Texas says he doesn't have the manpower to deal with the problem.
Our county alone gets probably over 1,500 barrels of oil reported stolen every month.
Parker says the oil thieves know the oil drilling business, and law enforcement does not.
Our problem is we don't know who's supposed to be there and who's not. And the thing about it is, if I pulled up on a tank battery right now, I don't know if you can be there or you're not. I don't know if you're drawing water off of it. I don't know if you're pulling oil. It's got very complicated.
Texas lawmakers have responded by creating an organized oil field theft prevention unit within the Department of Public Safety, which is now training local sheriffs what to look for to spot an oil thief. The legislature also created the Stop Theft Task Force to study petroleum theft, gaps in the law, and long-term economic impacts. The task force will report its findings to state lawmakers in December. Texas has recently increased the criminal penalty for oil field theft. Depending on the value of what was stolen, a conviction can carry 2 to 10 years or up to life in prison. I'm David Martin Davies in San Antonio.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the beef-loving Texans at the Texas Beef Council, a community passionate about what they eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared. Recipes and meal ideas at beeflovingtexans.com. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' compensation provider that's been caring for hardworking Texans for over 30 years. More at texasmutual.com/expert partner.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm Angela Kocherga. Have you heard of valley fever? Depending on where you live in Texas, you could soon become more familiar with it. It's an illness spread by a fungus in the soil in hot, dry climates. Cases of valley fever have tripled in El Paso between 2013 and 2022. A new study from the University of Texas at El Paso links that to extreme weather and dust. Dr. Gabriel Ibarra Mejia is an associate professor of public health sciences and one of the lead researchers on the study. Dr. Ibarra Mejia, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Well, I remember hearing about valley fever a lot in the Phoenix, Arizona area, but most people here in this region are not familiar. Let's start by telling listeners a little more about the symptoms of valley fever.
Valley fever, it's a very common disease, yes, in the all southwestern states of the United States, but we rarely hear it about here in Texas. The symptoms could be very mild. They can mimic a simple upper airways respiratory disease and maybe go back deep into the lungs and cause pneumonia. If left untreated or undiagnosed and untreated, then it can create several other types of complications throughout all the entire body. So it can lead to disability and even death.
Oh, very serious. I remember hearing even some dogs were getting it out there in Arizona.
Yes. It is very also common in other animals, especially dogs.
Well, you found cases increased not just as part of regular dust events, which we see here, of course, especially in the spring, but they were related to extreme wind and those dust events combining. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, our research says a couple of things. The first thing is that it's a combination of factors, and depending on the time of these weather occurrences. For example, we have shown that it was associated after 1 month of having high levels of PM 2.5 and PM 10, but after 4 months of having these dust events or other types of dust-related issues. PM is particulate matter. Particulate matter is a type of contaminant that it's monitored continuously by the TCEQ and using their equipment. And this is basically very small particulate matter, smaller, like 100 times smaller than the diameter of a hair. We call it like that because of the size, which is 2.5 microns. And the importance of this size is that can actually go into your upper airwaves, go all the way down to the lungs, and sometimes get into your bloodstream through the lungs. So it is not necessarily, something that we're going to see in the same month or the following days after any of these extreme weather events, but it's going to take time. And this is just because that is the pathogenesis of this fungi.
So does your research help predict when people might be more susceptible to valley fever?
Our model tends to predict that after we have several conditions, well, the most important one is actually having 1 month prior a heat event that is greater than 102 degrees and having PM 2.5 and PM 10 levels that are also very high. After 1 month, we can expect some cases. The other one is after 4 months of having these dust events.
So what work needs to be done to educate people in the El Paso region about valley fever?
Our efforts are into increasing awareness that this is a condition that is prevalent to El Paso. One thing that we are trying to do is that to bring awareness to the entire state, because valley fever cases are only a reportable condition in El Paso County. But there is a high probability, and we have a level of uncertainty, there are other cases in other parts of West Texas and even all the way to South Texas.
So this is out there, but right now we're not tracking it as much?
Yes, it's not being tracked. It's something that is only being tracked here in El Paso County.
Oh, so we don't know how widespread it might be in other parts of the state.
At this point, we don't. In other states like California and Arizona, New Mexico, it's a reportable state for every county, but here in Texas, only for El Paso County.
Oh, so much more to learn about this. Getting back to this region, what role does, and maybe elsewhere down the road, what role does development play in exacerbating, if it does, the risk of valley fever?
Well, the spore, to call it like that, of valley fever does not live on the surface of the soil. It's a little bit deep, about 4 or 6 inches deep. So usually when there's a lot of soil disruption, like that associated to construction sites, blasting, even, small things like animal burrows, digging burrows, they tend to dig up the spore and bring it out to the surface. And after the conditions are right, like a little bit of moisture, a couple of weeks, then these spores will either sprout by themselves, or in our cases, in the climate that we have, which is hot and dry, and then it tends to have a lot of wind, then these spores will be transported elsewhere using wind.
Well, getting back to the individual, how would someone know they have valley fever? Because some of those symptoms sound kind of generalized, and then maybe some prevention tips for people.
Yes, they sound very generalized, but there is a specific antigen test that your health provider can perform, right? What we also want to do is bring awareness to healthcare personnel to actually seek actively these type of cases, because we also feel, and there has been studies that say that this disease has heavily underreported. How to protect yourself? Well, if you see these conditions, be aware that not on probably the day of the event, but after several days, you might have this type of symptoms, and this could be up to a month or even up to 4 months after. Once you start getting the symptoms, seek the advice of a professional healthcare personnel. Don't medicate yourself. Don't try to just, disregard it. And in order to prevent it, for us, it's very important to bring awareness to when there's dust events, when there's heat waves, when they're continuing monitoring our very prolonged drought that we have in this region. But also, this goes over to the individual level. If you're disrupting the soil, if you're digging up a hole, if your job involves digging, building trenches or being exposed to dust that's being disrupted by machinery, then protect yourself. The least that you can do is at least wear protective equipment to cover your nose and mouth, and just be aware that this is actually something that can happen in this region.
Dr. Gabriel Ibarra Mejia is an associate professor of public health sciences at UTEP and one of the lead researchers of a new study about valley fever. Dr. Ibarra Mejia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You know what remittances are, right? Transfers of money sent by foreign workers back to their families or others in their home countries. This amounts to a significant flow of capital, with about 1.5 million people in Texas using online services or smartphone apps to send remittances. But a consumer watchdog is warning border enforcement may be keeping tabs. That story, the week in politics, and more on our Friday edition of the Texas Standard. Before we sign off, a quick look at future clouds and radar as the weekend approaches. Out west, expect hot and sunny, while the east deals with humidity and storms. Saturday's the stormiest day statewide. Sunday sees conditions improve for just about everyone except northeast Texas. Now, if you're planning to be outdoors this weekend for whatever reason, Sunday's probably your best bet. We'll have a clearer picture tomorrow, and we hope you can join us then.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, the George Huntington family, and the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation.